We are live. Thank you, Tara, for joining me live. This is very impromptu, folks. I literally messaged Tara 2 hours ago and said, hey, how do you feel about taking tea time live today? I am not prepared, but I am taking the leap of faith if you will join me. And she said yes, which is why we're here. And you can all thank Simon Chow for this because he challenged me and I did not back down from a challenge. And so here we are. We are live. And I'm so grateful for Tarek. And I think this is a really important conversation to have live. And I'm really looking forward to y'all chiming in. So please, please, please ask us questions. I am paying attention to the chat window. We want to hear from you. And we want you to, it's a live conversation about a very live topic. So we're going to get into it. Before we get there, a little bit about Tara. Tara was on Tea Time with me many moons ago. At least it feels many moons ago, 2020. And she was head of marketing at GetAccept on the US side. Since she has joined Pavilion and CMO Alliance, had a baby, and is now at Revenue Grid as the VP of Demand. So she is making moves, folks. And we're going to hear her story from her lips in a moment. But I want to sort of preface the conversation with the fact that Tara wrote a post a few weeks ago about she was living on the edge, folks, and that you either 100% agree with her and you go cheer and go Tara go, or you're asking if she's a crazy person and to please stop saying this nonsense and asking her to quiet down. Well, I'm with Tara, which is why she's joining me, because I believe that we all should be aligned to a revenue number. But I have a lot of questions around how to get there, because it is not an off on, oh, all of a sudden marketing has to own a revenue number, and here we go. And Tara's going to unpack that for us. But before we get there, Tara, so grateful. Thank you for taking this leap with me.
Of course. Thanks for having me. What an intro here. I love it.
Well, I don't know if I got any of it right. So you tell us your story, Tara. Where are you now? You're at Revenue Grid, but how did you get there? What's your story? Remind us.
Yeah. So depends on how far back you want me to go. But my whole career, I've been in marketing. I have been explaining that I am an intentional marketer. So I actually have 2 degrees in marketing. I've only been in marketing, and it's just something I've always loved. But I've had kind of like a great journey to get to VP of Demand Gen. So earlier in my career, I was more, the specialist, kind of tactical, hands-on. A little part of me is still hands-on because I can't help it. But I'm so numbers driven now, just because I've had many different roles, and it's just like the way my brain works. And I just really think a lot of marketers, either early in their career or they work at organizations, or they're not set up for a success that someone hasn't mentored or coached them, or they haven't had the chance to really understand the impact. And I think one of the best ways you can do that, it doesn't matter what role you're in marketing, you do help drive pipeline and revenue. So it's one of the reasons I love demand gen. It's sometimes very difficult to measure. Sometimes it's easier, but I like to move fast. I like challenges. Of course, Carrie's the one that reminded me the last time we spoke that I just had a baby, and I was like, right, yeah, he's 2. And I think marketing in general is just a lot of learning, a lot of lessons, and a lot of trying, figuring out what works and what doesn't work. But being able to articulate that and measure that is kind of key. So it's my little story.
We're going to unpack that in a second, because like I said, I have a ton of questions around, when you're talking about demand gen, but then also owning a revenue number. Those feel a little, there seems to be some friction there that we're gonna unpack. So hang on, folks. Before we get there, and trying to still follow my Tea Time for Tech Marketing Leaders podcast format, if you're a longtime listener, my next question, which is, and I know I asked this in 2020, Tara, but times change. So tell us, what's one challenge you're currently facing?
So I would say I'm not alone in this challenge, but I think one of the biggest, not only generating pipeline, but generating the right type of pipeline that follows all the way through to closed one. is a challenge today. I think it'll always be a challenge. And it's a very forward-looking view, because a lot of marketers stop at MQL, or they stop at pipeline and they say, oh, I did my job, and then they walk away. But really what matters is what happens after that, right? And we're really not the ones in control there. But that's how you get more budget. That's how you get more resources, when you can actually show that the pipeline kind of moves through the funnel and makes an impact on the business bottom line. So that's my current challenge. And yeah, it's not easy in today's market.
It's not. I keep mentioning how many questions I have, but before, I know you're all on the edge of your seat. I promise we're going to get there. I just want to make sure that I'm giving Tara's story the right acknowledgement, because she said something really important there that I truly believe too. And it's this word intentional. You call yourself an intentional marketer. Can you just define that? Because I think it's going to really set the stage for this conversation. What does intentional marketer mean to you?
Intentional marketer means to me that a lot of marketers today that I meet don't have a background to like theory or schooling or experience, and they kind of stumbled into marketing, which is fine, right? But it's like whatever path you took to get to your role, there's no right or wrong way to get anywhere. I honestly think it's more about the journey. But for me, since I've had like specialist roles, I have a degree in global marketing, I always start with like theory and the way humans interact and the way that they work together. And I think that's one of the main reasons that somebody had given me this compliment before, one of the best relationship marketers, meaning like internally and externally, because I really genuinely want to know someone else's challenges and the way that they think and the way that they work best and where they see success. And for me, that's the best way you can bridge a gap between what you believe your marketing team can achieve and what others internally believe that you can too. And stopping that whole like, okay, well, that's what marketing does and this is what sales does. So it's like you have to really bridge a really big gap. And most of that has to just do with your relationship with counterparts in the organization. And to me, it doesn't matter what level. Yeah, it can be like the CEO and then, director of sales, but it can be a BDR that is super honest and open, or an AE or the product manager. It doesn't really matter who it is, but I think just showing that you're open and honest and being intentional with what you're trying to do as an organization.
Comes back to your why, which I feel like you have a very clear why. You laid it out. The reason why marketers need to be attached to a revenue number is because it makes your life so much it's harder. It sounds harder on the onset. We're not trying to say that what we're saying is easy, but if you can get there to where marketing actually contributes to the bottom line in revenue, then it makes things easier in terms of asking for resources and budget, because you've proven that it drives to the bottom line. Did I catch?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why there's a rise in CMOs becoming CROs. And, there's more CMOs that are at every executive meeting than there's ever been before. So there's like a shift in a lot of organizations, the narrative around what marketing actually does. It's somehow grown into like, we drive leads and like, that's it. And it's like, whoa, there's so many other facets to this, right? And, it's hard sometimes when you talk about brand, right? Brand awareness is super hard to measure sometimes, but it depends on the organization that you're in and the industry. But that also can drive demand, which drives pipeline and connecting all those dots. And a lot of it's just like telling your own story, taking big bets and saying, this is really what I believe works for our market and our industry, because I know the market as the marketing leader, and I know this is how people buy, and this is the path that I think we should take.
Let's sit in that for a second. We'll start with brand, because I do think that's a big question of, and I think people are starting to break their budgets down too, in terms of money going towards brand that's not really measurable, and then money going towards bottom funnel that is more that lead gen. And so you're saying you can connect the dots has technology shifted in that we do now have the ability to see end to end, even if it is from a very first touch, like visual of a banner, right? People don't even click through; they just like sort of see a banner. Can we actually see all the way through now? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so that's not exactly what I'm saying, but actually technology is getting a lot closer. Honestly, some of the tools, at least our team's been evaluating for marketing attribution. That's a whole other live and it's in itself. We won't go down that road too much, but unless you want to.
Touch on it.
There are some tech tools that are getting much closer to saying like, hey, this is your segment and your audience, and they actually saw your ads. And they don't click on the ads, but hey, they're now on your website. So those tools are starting to emerge and exist. But what, for me, I think if you're a marketing leader and you really believe that brand does drive a lot of demand and it's just gray and you haven't really figured out, it's like taking a stand to say like, this is how I'm going to measure brand awareness. And it's going to be branded traffic, organic branded traffic, it's direct traffic, it's it's our social following, it's and like really identifying those and seeing the trend hopefully go in the right direction that you need to grow your brand awareness, and crafting that strategy around it and saying like, hey, look at this is the growth of 20%, 25, it's all going in the right direction. You can't say this is not brand awareness. It's like controlling your own story, I think, internally to people, whoever that might be, and really being, I don't know, very adamant about it. Because a lot of people just are going to make up their own assumptions, right? If you don't, as a marketing leader, tell them your vision and what you're trying to build.
I think that's important. It's not, from a CEO to a CMO standpoint, like the CEO doesn't know what they don't know. So what I feel like you're saying is, as the CMO and the expert in the room, you really need to take the bull by the horns and define what those metrics are. And brand isn't going to be measurable end to end, but it's going to be a bridge where, we talk about this all the time from a digital ads perspective. When you're doing some site direct buys, right? You're not going to see site direct buys impact the bottom line, but what you will see guaranteed is your brand keyword lift, right? You're going to see that brand awareness totally lift from a keyword standpoint, and that is measurable. And then the branded keyword terms are incredibly powerful from a bottom line standpoint. So it's a bridge. Yeah,
great example. Yeah,
and it does tie back to revenue when you're looking at the funnel, right?
Yeah, I think so. For me, there was a time where I was trying to measure marketing influence, which is a slippery slope. I would not do that today. I would not suggest to do that today. But I would say that within your own marketing team, that could be a way to look at, like you're talking about, that connection between certain things, whether it's like a campaign or it's results of, an event or something. It can influence some other things that you are tracking, right?
Yep.
That's the way that you can do it, at least in an internal marketing, like analysis and insights of like, yes, absolutely, this ABM campaign influenced this, but it wasn't the only thing. But if you understand the buying journey, you know that it's not one thing anymore in marketing. Just because you run this big campaign, all of a sudden they aren't just like, oh my gosh, now I'm going to buy your product or your service. It's just not how it takes. Yeah.
How many touch points in your experience does it take for somebody to actually become a lead? Like you not even down to actually buying, but like there's several touch points that need to happen.
Yeah.
It's many.
Yeah. Many, exactly. So really the number that comes to mind for me right now is like 18. Yeah. A lot of my experiences in B2B tech, just to be clear around that. So, and that might even be even less, honestly, just given the last 2 years and everything that's been going on.
Yeah, it's interesting because it seems to be, and I think this is where ABM comes in that you alluded to, it's not just one buyer anymore, one decision maker, it's multiple. So you need 18 touch points from each individual, which from an account level adds up. Are you seeing that on your end in terms of sort of buying committees and not just one buyer, but needing to sort of convince a team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's becoming more and more just the norm at this stage and just where we are, at least in the US, for the economy. And it can depend. It might be like the person who was the decision maker and the signer isn't really, at the end of the day, they have to go get this like next level approval that in the past they didn't have to do that. They kind of have to sell it internally and articulate their value. And that can even be like the CFO, who really doesn't, at the end of the day, know exactly what you're talking about if you're trying to explain, oh, we're going to spend this much money on a MarTech tool and this is what it does. But it's like there's so many more layers of I don't know, investment like protection now. And yeah, that's why like building relationships is super important internally, so they can understand like what you're trying to do with the money that you're using it smart. And depends on the product, but I think there's just more people involved in general. Because when you think about buying, you're kind of putting your own your own name on the line, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you're sort of vouching for the thing that you're recommending that we put into the company and buy. Yeah, that does feel, and then the buyers are more sort of settled and you're like, oh no, what did I do?
Yeah. And depending on what you're buying, you're not going to stand it up by yourself. You know, usually the like signer or buyer is not like the project implementation manager. So you actually need other people involved in that to kind of do the checks and balances, look at the challenges, and kind of get their own buy-in at the same time.
That's true. You mentioned that the market has shifted. We're talking about the buying committee being part of that. Where else have you seen the market shift that's now impacting this need for marketing owning a revenue number?
Yeah, great question. I think, honestly, it's a little bit of a patience that it's not really there in certain organizations. And it's really all stemming from a financial model of like runway of businesses of how long they have. I always say like, okay, like that makes sense. Like I understand the number, I understand the math. And my question is, how long do I have? Right? Like building pipeline doesn't happen overnight. Is this like 6 months, 9 months? Because if you think about it from an investment standpoint, you don't have endless investment money, right? It's like you're investing in, you know, marketing, maybe dollars or tech or people. So if you say you have a limited budget, or, you know, a lot of it's already allocated, or budgets are going down. That's the other thing that's happening. It's like, hey, you still have this number, but we're going to take 20% like back from you. So understanding the length of time to in your sales process, and when you have the pipeline and all of that, in order to like make sure you're doing things at the right time. Because the reason I ask that is like, how fast do I have to like mobilize a team, even if it's your existing team?
Yeah. What do you mean by mobilize? Like rally the troops, rally the team, like go time?
Yeah, like unless you're crushing it and you think all of the programs and all of the campaigns and everything that you do today will get you to where you need to be in 6 months, 9 months, and a year, I would argue most marketing teams are not in that boat to iterate, figure out different things that they're doing, what's working, what's not working. You know, are you cutting your losses? Are you saying, okay, this is something that we did last year for this goal and this reason, and we didn't hit it. Should we continue doing this, or should we just stop it? Or do we iterate? Do we change it? Do we look at the data and said like it wasn't a complete failure, but we go back and change X, Y, and Z? And so I think that's why like the timing of understanding that. And I think that's like shifted really fast because of the market and because companies just aren't seeing the results at the end of the day that they wanted, and they've had to make some really tough decisions, whether it's people or budgets. But they're still businesses at the end of the day. Like they keep going. They need to have a strategic plan on how they're going to get there. Yeah.
When you're saying things have shifted really fast, do you mean the market has shifted really fast to people, to C-suites needing things faster? Or do you just mean people needing things faster? Like, there does seem to be the shift of, well, we haven't done any marketing to this day, or we've done a bit, but we haven't really been strategic about it. And now we need everything to happen like yesterday. Are you feeling that too? Is that what you've seen in the market? Or is this new, or is this because of the market?
Right. No, good question. I mean, the pressure is always there for marketing, right, to deliver. But I think because of, sales cycles getting longer, budgets getting like tighter, there's more emphasis on marketers to deliver than there's ever been. And that's kind of the shift that I see. That it's not just marketing, like doing outbound sales is very difficult right now. So it's like, oh, okay, let's see what more we can kind of get out of marketing.
Well, it feels like part of the shift is people relate to this, right? The pitch slap, the emails, the relentlessness of sales showing up at our door and knocking digitally over and over and over again, not just once, but like at least 4 emails behind it, and how sick, I hate to say it, but like, I feel like we're all sort of sick of it. So it's sort of left sales high and dry of like, if people won't respond to me because they're tired of this approach, then it does feel like marketing's got to come and show up in a real intentional way to support the sales team now, because it's more about, correct me if I'm wrong or if you disagree or whatever, but it's more about surrounding our audience now, giving them as much value as possible, showing up for them continuously, and being there when they're ready to make a decision, and the decision's theirs that we have zero control over.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. It's like, that's why this whole like evolution of a lot of companies and marketers focusing on demand, where historically it was like leads, and leads are just people, right? Where it's like, in order to create the demand for your company, you're basically trying to segment your market, figure out your ICP, and constantly build a relationship with them. So the second they have a need, they think of your brand. And that's not easy. Like we already talked about the touch points, right? So that's why it's like the patience sometimes is hard, because you're like doing all the right things. And if the buyers just aren't willing to buy right now or spend their time investigating something, it's a really hard spot to be in. And I think there's just pressure from every angle of the most businesses these days. So,
do you find that demand gen takes more resources than lead gen? Like, from, obviously lead gen isn't really working right now, so we all have to shift the way we're doing things. So it's more of a then versus now versus than a lead versus demand. But it feels like it takes more time, it takes more resources, it takes more money. Is that fair to say, or is in the long run it actually works better revenue wise, money wise?
I think it works better in the long run. It's hands down harder and more labor intensive for sure, because it's also like, what's your story, right? Like if you're in an industry where there's tons of competitors, it's like, gone are the days where you're like selling features. It's like, okay, like people already recognize that they might have a problem, but they don't know your tool exists, for example. So by like giving them marketing content and all that, just about a feature base, like they need to know like what's in it for them and what you stand for as a brand. And a lot of that goes more towards demand gen. So it's a lot more like creative by nature, where a traditional lead model is more just like, let's capture as many people as possible we believe are in our ICP, and then we'll think about it later. Where this is more like, are they aware of us? That's a whole step. Are they engaged with us? Now we need to nurture them. Now we need to articulate, you know, there's just like a many step process in demand gen versus like capturing a lead saying like, oh yeah, they'll totally fit our ICP when they're ready to buy.
Download this thing now.
Yeah.
And let me just hit them a couple of times with the same message about downloading this thing now.
Yeah, and then they want to demo.
Gone are those days.
Yeah.
Gone are those days. It is a big creative and content lift. So what kind of content have you seen to work? Because we have said like, you can't just show up and ask for a download. So before we get to the ungated conversation, which is where we are headed naturally, what kind of content are you seeing to be value driven that people are really like wanting and engaging with?
Yeah, so our persona I think it depends on the persona, right? But is more sales leadership, rev ops, and these are all data driven people, right? They have a number and really just insights and analytics of like showing them there's a better way. Like if you go to any single one of them and say like, hey, I can increase your win rate by X, they're going to turn their head. Like, obviously, you know? So it's like, it's like, how big is that number? No. But so something centered around that and really like building that relationship to like catch their eye. So there's like so many different formats you can do that with, right? But I'm a big fan of like micro type of content because you don't catch any like VP of sales or CRO like really leafing through this like big report. They might every now and again, you know, but they don't do this like on a weekly basis, right? So
yeah. So what's micro content mean for you? Is that
yeah. So micro content for me is like you might end up actually having a big piece. Like we have like a new state of the revenue operations and intelligence report coming out, which has a ton of data. But yeah, and of course it's available to download, but like that's a really large piece of content. And so it's almost like being real with your team of like, in theory, if we got like 100 sales leaders, you know, in the hundreds to look at this, that's amazing. But I don't think that's that realistic. So it's trying to like put it out there where they spend their time, you know, in social and communities and through relationships and having people to people send it to them, but really taking like bite-size information, whether it's like an infographic or a quick video or a post or like a hot take, or even like more storytelling. I think that's what everybody wants to hear. It's like, oh, okay, like these are my challenges, but I'm not alone. And look at what happened to my friend over here, and they did X, Y, and Z, and they achieved that. And so however you can like format that, because people buy from their friends and referrals or that trust. And so if you put it in the story and the lens from that perspective, then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I should talk to them.
You gotta make it easy to retell.
Yeah.
So is this it seems very visual in the way that you're saying this. So you mentioned video, infographics. I haven't heard that word in so long, but I'm glad it's still alive because it's awesome. And then is this like social that's shared? That's basically, you said, to be where they are. So
yeah,
I'm guessing there's some paid maybe with that, but it really feels social in the way that you're describing it.
Yeah, I would say organic social and paid social, of course. And I also think there is some like community aspect of that. If, you know, there's communities that where your ICP and your person, like where they spend their time, whether that's online or it's even in person, you know, things like that. It's just always keeping in mind that people's attention spans are so short, like so short. I always say like, no one reads emails, they skim or scan. Make it shorter, make it digestible, you know? So,
bullet points.
Yeah. Right? It's just like, you're not going to be able to like have the brain capacity in today's world and how busy people are for them to really get a lot out of something that's in a super long form content.
Yeah, unless it's a story. I do find myself stopping on LinkedIn when somebody starts telling me a story about an experience they're having. And so I do think, Get Accepted, I know Get Accepted it in terms of the company you're at today. Are they leaning into this too, where you're engaging your sort of C-suite to help tell that story? Because when we're talking people to people, personal branding, is that coming in to play here in terms of retelling those stories?
It's coming. Yes. It's in the works. So yeah, for sure. Especially in our space. It's at every company, it's typically a matter of bandwidth and getting a process in place to just kind of get that out there. So
Yeah, it's a lift. It's a
mm-hmm.
it's a heavy lift because you can't just show up and say, "Hey,
yeah,
I need you to post more on LinkedIn."
yeah, to somebody who's like super busy. And yeah, I was talking about this the other day, and it's how I try to like be just open and honest. Like everybody has imposter syndrome. It doesn't matter what level you're at, but like if you're in a leadership position, you have so much value to add, and like figuring out what that focus is and like telling it. Like people want to listen, and I think that's like the hardest part when people are like, oh, you want me to like you want me to speak, and it's like, yes, like if you do it in a casual way, you're like an amazing speaker on behalf of this brand and this company. So it's really getting some people to step outside their comfort zone. I mean, including me when I started. Absolutely.
Takes practice, for sure.
Yeah.
I even still have it. Like even today, it's like, oh, we're going live. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
The storytelling though piece I find is really tricky when, for me personally, in order for me to retell stories, I have to hear them firsthand. Because I have questions and I want to understand it and I want to unpack it and tell me more. And
Yeah.
then I feel like I can retell it as if it was not necessarily my own, but as if I really understood what the problem was, how our team went about solving it, what the nuanced challenges they came in contact with and how they overcame those. I find when you give sales just a script of a story, that gets a little lost. How do you, when you're talking about storytelling and retelling the stories and being in events and being in communities and having like even a C-suite retell the stories, how are you making it feel grounded and authentic and part of the journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always go back to knowing your audience and constantly asking yourself, why would they care? Why would they care? And knowing who's in your audience is super important, because I had a speaking session once and it was on like customer experience. And I'm like, am I the right person to speak at this? Maybe, maybe not. Like usually you would think a CS leader. And so I remember building the presentation, just constantly going back to what, like if you're in CS or that type of role, what you would care about, right? And they care about retaining customers and happy customers. And so I always try to build the story and like poke holes in it throughout like kind of the iteration process of that, and being real with like, yeah, no, that persona doesn't care about that. Like in the shorter, more compelling and kind of like bold you can be and say something different that maybe someone hasn't heard before. And a lot of that's just like wording and, like massaging of all of that type of stuff. But you can kind of turn a lot of customer stories or data into something compelling if there's like a hook in the beginning and something exciting and then the results. But constantly going back to like, will I keep their attention or not to keep listening to me?
It's not about you. And it's always interesting too, because when you talk about your story, right, when you're telling a story, it's not, I think what you're saying, I just want to make sure people are really clear on it. Even though you're telling a story, it's not about your brand story of how we got started. And this is, our story of why us. And it's, to your point and everything you're saying, just driving it home and being crystal clear, like, is about who you're speaking to and what matters to them and how you're going to reframe your story as it relates to who's on the receiving end of that and making them feel part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Good way to.
It's hard to do.
It's super hard to do. And there's also like storytelling by committee. Not everybody thinks like the way you just explained it. Mm-hmm. And because a lot of people say, oh, your brand story is like what, like a traditional, like this is where we came from and this is who we are. And, you know, like that's part of it, right? But you can't continue with that and assume people are going to care. An example, to be honest, that we're but we're about to do is we're going through a whole rebranding. And like, no one cares when a brand changes their brand identity. Let's all be real. It's so much work. And it's needed at, you know, whatever stage, and it happens a lot, but it's really tying it to like, what's the bigger story? You know, if you just change like a lot of the brand identity and your voice and your tone, like, to be honest, a lot of people aren't even going to notice. Oh, wow, new logo, or this color scheme, or, you know, like they changed this. It's like, okay. But if you can tie that to something bigger and bolder and whatever that could be, sometimes it could be like a big product release or an announcement or a brand like campaign that you make your persona as the hero, or, you know, take a stand for something, then it's noticeable.
Yeah. I also think it's a sort of growing up with your customer, right? When you start off as a startup and you have this very specific product to solve a specific problem, and then you get in, you know, you bring your customer into that, and then you sort of, I don't know if this is a good analogy or not. When we're live, we're going to roll with it. But it feels like when Harry Potter first started and that first book came out, right? And you grow up with the characters and the stories got more and more complex, right? Mm-hmm. That's every rebrand that happens, is because you have to grow up with your audience and you have to connect with where they are today as it fits the market and how your product has evolved with them, right? I think Get Accept is a beautiful example of this, of how they started off as just a DocuSign competitor. And now they are an entire sales suite, right? But they didn't start that way. They grew up with their customer and really listened to what their customer needed and then evolved the product. Like, yes, rebrands are necessary, and back to your customers' needs, where they are today, because it's not where they were 5-10 years ago. Yeah.
And where they want to go. That's the other thing. And now I can admit that I've never read any Harry Potter books or seen anything. So I was like, I don't know how deep she's going to go.
Well, you have kids. That's going to change at some point. Which is great, because then you get to go on the journey with them, and it's glorious. I just revisited and like redid that with my kids, and it was really fun to like go back in time. And but yeah,
I've never seen any. People are floored. I'm like, I don't know. I just never got into it.
That's fantastic. Well, hopefully somebody understands my analogy. It's all good.
It sounded great. I was following totally.
I have to draw back to yeah. Anyway, I want to touch on attribution before I close out here, because you mentioned it and we're coming back. I want to come back to the importance of the whole conversation we've been having around marketing, owning revenue to some degree. Are you saying marketing should be, is it a percentage? Is it all of it? Is it ROI in relation to revenue?
I mean, it obviously depends on your organization and your go-to-market strategy, but I mean, you need to do the math and see what percent of closed won, you know, new revenue, if it's net new logo, if it's expansion, there's a whole customer marketing leg too. If that's part of your business, of like came from marketing. And then there you go. Because like when you go and do projections and numbers, you need to figure out like, okay, last year 50% came from marketing. Are we going to say that's the same next year? Are we going to put the pressure on and tell them 75, right? And then the marketer goes, okay, you want me to increase by that, but I need more money. Or, you know, it helps really understand where that is coming from. So whether you don't own like the full, like at the end of the day, which I understand, I think the idea is at the very least pipeline and understanding the pipeline that is really coming in from marketing should be the goal. And then there's different variations of that. A lot of marketing teams are like, yep, we have pipeline by dollar amount, and we also are measured on deals, like number of deals plus the dollar amount. There's also like, we've been talking about internally also having measurement around number of meetings. And it's more because it'll bridge even more of an alignment of our inbound and really, really working very close with our SDR team in trying to figure out like the quality, the ones that get DQ'd, and really increasing that conversion rate. So number of meetings too is something that I think is also important, but understanding how those all fit together, and then at the end of the day, impacting the bottom line of the revenue.
I think what you're saying is about taking a step-by-step approach, right? Not just immediately jumping to owning revenue, but
Yes.
right, but saying, okay, we own pipeline. We've gotten to some good pipeline numbers.
Yep.
In order to make pipeline even better, let's look at the next metric, which is setting meetings. And then of those meetings of people showing up and what's the drop off and how can we tighten that up? And then slowly working yourself down through the sales system to that ultimately revenue number, and then sort of tightening it up, that those conversion rates up over and over and over again through tweaks. Because you have to have enough data for it to be statistically significant enough for you to even be making decisions, right? If you get a whale,
yes,
you land one deal that's huge, you can't just go say, okay, everybody, it came from LinkedIn, that's all we're going to do now.
Yeah. And that's happened every company I've ever worked at. And it's like, woo, and we're celebrating. And you know, it's like the saddest thing as a marketer, you take those big whales out of your calculations a lot. I mean, it's in there in like the final numbers, but when you start to do like ACV and all of that, it's like, oh, but it's like, no, but you took out our biggest deal. But when you're doing the modeling and the projection, it doesn't really make sense unless you're going to completely change your strategy and say, we're now going to go after all these whales, right? It depends on, you know, where you're at, but yeah, for sure. I think that's the way to go. I think, because in today's world, the answer is just not more pipeline, right? Like there's always improvement in conversion rates and process, and it's everybody's job that sits on a forward-facing revenue team. So it's marketing, it's the SDRs, it's the AEs, it's solution engineers, you know, and it's CS that might have a quota to really understand where we can improve. Are you at benchmarks? Are things falling? Are your win rates going down? You know, like all of that really impacts, because then at the end of the day, the last thing you want is like the blame game of, oh, we didn't close this because of X. And it's like, well, what about here? Because we said that was going to, you know, convert 50% of the time, but it's converting at 30. Like you're leaking revenue at that point, you know?
It's so true. Yeah, I also wonder about when we're talking about attribution too, in that, right? So, you know, you can always get better, but if you can't measure half of it, right? And we talked about that in the beginning, where there's a bit of a bridge here. Yeah, there isn't 100% answer here, but at the end of the day, you want to work yourself down that funnel. You want to tweak it and tighten it up. You want to make sure everyone who's a contributor is in the room. Is there any last piece of advice you would give folks who are trying to are being pushed really, really hard to get here and are working their tails off to do it, but they know, I think as marketers, we all know, like, this stuff takes time and we're doing our best. And they have the CEOs sort of breathing down their neck, who have the board members breathing down their necks, who have the investors breathing down their necks, right? So it's like, you know, what do you say to those marketers who agree, yes, we all want to get here, but also...
Yeah. I would say my best piece of advice is get yourself in the meetings and push for alignment and consensus over process, where you're at, conversion rate, question things. It's not a blame game. It's just getting everybody on the same page of like where we realistically are at. Because if you don't do that, it's going to be a big internal struggle. And aligning across where you're going to focus. Like, where's the marketing team's focus for demand gen? How do we think we're going to hit that? Explain it, share it with them, ask for feedback, And they're like the same thing with sales or any other kind of like revenue stream that you have at your company. And I think if you don't have all the data or the insights or that alignment, it's a very difficult job.
For folks who are just starting off and just starting to get here, what advice do you have them for getting started? What should they have very little data. Their sales systems are just sort of, standing up. They're about to launch into the paid market. They have some organic. They know that this is the end goal, but they have to move very quickly. How do you, yes to being in all the meetings, yes to herding the cats, yes to content, and also what do they, yes to alignment. At the end of the day, there's that pressure you're talking about. And so what's sort of your gentle advice to them on navigating new world and all the minefields that come with it?
I'm trying to think. I would say do your own level of research outside your organization if you can, on like benchmarking where other similar companies are. Also get involved in, this is something we talked about at the very beginning. So I'm a member of Pavilion, CMO Alliance, Revenue Circle. There's like more communities that I'm in, and I ebb and flow of like my time in there, right? Time is tough these days. But when I'm questioning myself or being like, is that idea crazy that I said out loud and it didn't feel like anybody else kind of like agreed with me or just like understood or has the same level of thinking? You don't have to agree with me, but just like generally, have that same experience or have heard of it before, like dive into community and ask questions. People are so helpful. And even if you're not that active, which you should, of course, be, there's so much knowledge in there from some serious like revenue leaders with some really good backgrounds and track records of them themselves posting things of like, hey, I need help with this, or have you guys seen this? And even if you just spend some time in there and like gathering as much knowledge as possible, it'll give you ideas and like a path forward to say like, hey, I'm not the first person that's ever done this, right? Let me go learn from some of these best people, or just help me so I don't feel alone. I think marketing is a very lonely job some days, no matter what level you're on. So you're not alone.
Yes, that's what I was looking for, that human element of how hard this is. So thank you for giving our listeners a place to go, to not feel alone, to debunk imposter syndrome, to get advice and ideas. Yes, so thank you, Tara. I'll have those all linked in the show notes once I do a complete wrap of this at a later date. But Tara, yes, this is so helpful. I think we all know that we have to head here, and we're just sort of trying to figure out where to start, and also trying to slow people down to say yes, and like, yes, let's work through the funnel to get there. We all know that that's what needs to happen. It's not going to happen overnight, and we got this, but we have to take one step at a time. And I really appreciate you taking us through that journey. Before we go, I do have my people first questions. Maybe you remember them, maybe you don't, so it'll feel fresh to you. I'm only going to ask one because we're at time. If you could go, now that the world is opened up, travel's easier in theory, maybe not with 3 kids, but was it a time? If things weren't hard and you could just go anywhere and pick up and just go, where would you go and why?
Ooh, I'm a big traveler, so I love this question. And I like dream and pretend I'm going on all these trips all the time. But as you alluded to, I have 3 kids, so it's not that easy. So I've always wanted to go to Thailand. One of my brothers has been there, and he spent a good amount of time there. And it just like fascinates me. Like within the country, there's so much to explore and do. And it's vastly different depending on like what region and where you're at. So that's on my list. I don't know when I will get there with a 9-year-old, 7-year-old, and old 2-year-old, but hopefully one day.
And then you're going to post it on Instagram, and I'm going to follow you, and it's going to be great.
Yes.
It's going to happen. I believe in it.
Yeah.
Tara, this was so great. Thank you, listeners. If you'd like to connect with Tara, please head on over to LinkedIn if you're not already there, and follow up, and make sure to follow. And she's posting a ton of content right now, and it's all like this, and it's so good. Dig in, soak it up. and make it your own. Thank you, Tara. This was wonderful. My little sound off that I normally do live is that this was brought to you by MKG Marketing, the digital marketing agency that scales brands through meaningful relationships, fueling their ability to push their mission forward. It's hosted by me, Carrie Gard, CEO and co-founder of MKG Marketing. Music mix and mastering done by Austin Ellis. And if you'd like to be a guest, please visit mkgmarketinginc.com to apply. Tara, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.